It was supposed to be just another family dinner. My husband had begged me to come, saying it was important. His parents were hosting one of their grand Friday night meals at their sprawling mansion, the kind where crystal glasses clinked and polished silverware glimmered under chandeliers. I dressed simply, a modest blue gown I had saved for special occasions. My hair was neatly tied back and I carried with me a warm smile, hoping to feel included and accepted. But the moment I stepped into that dining room, I realized I had walked into a battlefield. His parents barely looked at me. His mother, adorned in pearls, scanned me from head to toe as if I were a stain she couldn't remove. His father sipped wine without offering me a seat. His sister whispered something under her breath and laughter followed. And then came the moment that shattered me. When I tried to sit at the long oak dining table beside my husband, his father cleared his throat. "That seat is reserved for family," he said, his voice sharp. Before I could respond, my husband looked me in the eye and said words I will never forget. "You shouldn't sit there. You know, you're too poor for this table." The world around me stopped. The clatter of plates, the sound of cutlery, and the laughter of cousins all blurred into silence. My heart sank and my face burned with shame. Poor? Was that how he saw me? After everything I had given up for him? I forced a smile, pretending his words didn't pierce me. I stood quietly, carried my plate to a corner, and ate in silence while the rest of them feasted like royalty. That night I went home with a lump in my throat. I didn't cry in front of him. I waited until he fell asleep, then curled up in the bathroom, letting the tears fall until dawn. But somewhere in the middle of my sobbing, something inside me shifted. If I were too poor for his parents' table, then one day I would build my own table, so grand, so powerful that they would beg to sit at mine. That was the night I decided to rise. I didn't always feel small. When I first met Daniel, my husband, I was full of dreams. I was in my mid-20s working as a junior analyst at a finance firm. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it was honest and it paid my rent. I believed in building slowly. I believed in loyalty. Daniel was charming. He came from a wealthy family, the kind that had estates, old money, and the arrogance to match. He was handsome and smooth-talking, and he made me feel seen in ways no one else had. At first, his wealth didn't bother me. I wasn't chasing money. I wanted love, partnership, and respect. And he promised me all three. But what I didn't realize was this. Marrying into his world meant losing pieces of myself little by little. His family never approved of me. They didn't say it outright in the beginning, but their actions spoke volumes. His mother once joked that my dress looked like something from a thrift shop. His sister complained that I couldn't keep up with their travel standards. His father always introduced me as Daniel's wife, never by my name. "And Daniel?" He would laugh nervously and say nothing. "But love makes you blind, doesn't it?" I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would win them over with kindness, humility, and patience. So I made sacrifices. When Daniel wanted to start his own business, I emptied my savings account, the account I had built slowly, paycheck by paycheck, to help him. "It's an investment in our future," I told myself. He promised he would pay me back tenfold. When his parents insisted we live closer to them, I gave up the apartment I loved and moved into a neighborhood where I felt like an outsider. I was surrounded by wives who wore diamonds bigger than my paycheck and who asked me questions like, "So, what does your family do?" When Daniel struggled in the early years of his business, I picked up extra freelance work, often staying up past midnight typing reports and spreadsheets. I never complained. I thought I was being a good wife. But the truth was I was shrinking. The more I gave, the less I became. And then came the children conversation. His mother once pulled me aside and said, "You know, if you can't give him a child soon, maybe he'll find someone who can." I remember standing there, frozen, a smile plastered on my face while my stomach churned with humiliation. The weight of it all began to crush me. I had no savings, no financial independence, no voice in my marriage. And Daniel? He started changing too. His words became sharper. His affection became conditional. Whenever I tried to raise how his family treated me, he brushed it off. "That's just how they are," he'd say. Or worse, "Don't be so sensitive." I stayed silent. I thought silence was strength. But deep down, resentment was brewing. And then came that dinner. The night he told me I was too poor to sit at his parents' table. It wasn't just an insult. It was the mirror of all the sacrifices I had made, thrown back in my face. That night, after crying until my body ached, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were swollen, my lips trembling, but for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of something else. Determination. If they thought I was poor, if they thought I was small, then I would show them. Not out of anger. Not even out of revenge at first. But out of the need to reclaim the pieces of myself I had given away. And that was the beginning of my journey. The morning after that humiliating dinner, I woke up with swollen eyes and a pounding headache. Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed me on the forehead, grabbed his keys and left for the office. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just silence. That was the moment I realized something crucial. I couldn't wait for him or his family to validate me anymore. If I wanted respect, I had to earn it myself. Not in their eyes, but in my own. A month later, his sister Clara had her engagement party. His mother ordered me to attend. The ballroom glittered with gold. Clara raised her glass, thanking her family for the money that made the night possible. I froze because I knew part of that money had been siphoned from the savings I once gave Daniel. Then one of Clara's friends smirked. "Is that Daniel's wife? She looks simple." Laughter erupted. And Daniel? He just sipped his champagne. At gatherings I overheard whispers. "She'll never fit in. Daniel could have done better." Once I passed Clara's room and heard her laughing with a cousin. "She doesn't even know what caviar is." Each insult was gasoline on the fire inside me. That night I walked out alone. But this time I didn't cry. I whispered to myself, "This will not be the end of my story." And the very next morning, my transformation began. So I made a decision. I was going to rebuild. I started small. I dusted off my old laptop and reopened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Job applications. My hands trembled as I updated my resume. I hadn't worked full-time since helping Daniel with his business, but I wasn't empty-handed. Those freelance reports, those midnight spreadsheets, they were proof of my skill. For weeks I applied. Rejections came first, of course. But I didn't stop. Then one day I landed a position at a mid-size consulting firm. The pay wasn't huge, but it was steady, and most importantly, it was mine. When Daniel found out, he scoffed. "Why bother? My family already takes care of us." I smiled quietly and said nothing. But deep down I knew this was the beginning of something bigger. The firm became my training ground. I worked harder than I had in years, soaking up knowledge, building networks, and proving myself. I took online courses at night, sharpening my financial analysis skills. I built side hustles on weekends, consulting for small businesses that couldn't afford big firms. Slowly the extra money started trickling in. And here's the thing about silence, it's powerful. I didn't announce my progress. I didn't brag. I didn't tell Daniel's family a word. They thought I was still the poor wife eating scraps in the corner. Meanwhile I was climbing. 1 year later my side hustle took off. A client I had consulted for introduced me to an investor, and together, we launched a small but promising financial solutions startup. At first, it was just me and a handful of freelancers. But I poured my heart into it, every ounce of pain from those humiliations fueling me. Within 18 months we secured major contracts. Revenue doubled, then tripled. I opened a separate bank account. For the first time in years I watched my balance grow. Not from Daniel, not from his family, but from me. And every time I looked at those numbers I felt my spine straighten. My confidence returned. I walked taller. I spoke louder. But with growth came tension. Daniel noticed the changes. One night he confronted me. "You've changed. You think you're better than me now." I looked at him, calm but firm. "No, Daniel. I just finally think I'm better than the version of me who let you and your family treat her like nothing." His face twisted with anger. He didn't like this new me, the woman who didn't shrink anymore. But I didn't care. For the first time I wasn't afraid of losing him. They thought I was powerless. But in silence I was building something they could never touch. And soon they would see it with their own eyes. At brunch one Sunday his mother announced, "Clara and her husband will move into the guest house. Daniel, you and your wife will adjust." Adjust? That meant giving up my space for his sister. When I protested, his father sneered. "Don't be ungrateful. You should be thankful you even live here." Ungrateful. That word poisoned me. That night I quietly signed the lease for my own apartment. And that was the moment I knew. I no longer needed them at all. Being tied to Daniel's family had isolated me. I had given up friends, even distanced myself from relatives. But as I grew stronger, I rebuilt. I reconnected with old friends, joined business networks, surrounded myself with people who saw my worth. With every new connection, their opinion mattered less. I was no longer chasing a seat at their table. I was preparing to build mine. Something spectacular happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I had just signed our biggest deal yet. My startup had crossed 7 figures in annual revenue. My team surprised me with champagne in the office. And when I stepped outside that evening, I made a decision. I was going to buy something for myself. Something bold. Something that symbolized how far I'd come. That's how I ended up at the Tesla showroom. The sleek black Model X practically whispered my name. I signed the papers without hesitation. This wasn't just a car. It was a declaration. A symbol of every late night, every tear, every sacrifice turned into triumph. As I drove that car home for the first time, the hum of the engine felt like music. And I knew exactly where I would take it for its first grand entrance. Dinner. At his parents' house. The same table where they once said I was too poor. It was a Friday evening, almost 2 years after that infamous dinner. Daniel's parents were hosting again. I hadn't been to their home in months. They didn't invite me, of course, but this time I didn't need an invitation. Daniel had mentioned it in passing, and I knew this was the perfect moment. I pulled up to their mansion gates, my Tesla gliding silently like a predator in the night. The guard's eyes widened when the headlights flashed across his booth. I rolled down the window and his jaw nearly dropped. "Good evening, ma'am," he stammered, opening the gates quickly. I smiled. "Good evening." As I drove in, the sleek black body of the Tesla gleamed under the estate lights. Conversations on the porch quieted. Glasses froze midair. And for the first time, every eye turned toward me. I stepped out slowly. My heels clicked against the pavement. I wasn't in my modest blue gown anymore. This time I wore a fitted white suit, clean and powerful. My hair was styled simply, but every strand whispered confidence. Daniel's sister whispered something to her friend, but unlike years ago, there was no mocking laughter. Just stunned silence. I could feel their gazes follow me as I walked to the door. The same door I once entered like an outsider, head bowed, shoulders hunched. Not anymore. Inside, the oak dining table was set as always, with crystal glasses, silver platters, and laughter laced with superiority. His father raised an eyebrow as I entered. His mother's pearls practically rattled on her neck. And Daniel? His face was a mix of shock and something else. Fear, maybe. I didn't wait for them to speak. I pulled out a chair at the main table, the same one they once denied me, and sat down gracefully. No one stopped me. No one dared. The silence was thick. Then his mother finally broke it. "Is that your car outside?" "Yes," I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. "It's mine." Her lips trembled. "Yours." I nodded. "Paid for in full. From the business I built. From the money I earned. Alone." The table was still. Forks rested midair. For once there was no mocking, no laughter. Just the weight of truth pressing down on every one of them. His father cleared his throat. "Impressive." The word sounded like acid on his tongue. Daniel shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze. He knew. Deep down he knew he had lost the version of me he could control. Then his sister, usually the cruelest of them all, forced a smile. "You should sit closer," she said, gesturing toward the center. Next to Daniel. Ah, how the tables turn. But I didn't move. I simply smiled and said, "No. I'm fine right here." Because it wasn't about their table anymore. It was about mine. The rest of the dinner passed in awkward silence. They tried to talk, to pretend everything was normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Every time the Tesla keys glimmered on the table beside my plate, I could see their faces tighten. I didn't boast. I didn't lecture. I didn't need to. My presence and my success spoke louder than any words ever could. And that was the sweetest revenge. Not shouting. Not fighting. Not begging for respect. But quietly, calmly proving them wrong. When it was time to leave, I stood up slowly. I didn't thank them for the meal. I didn't apologize for existing. I simply picked up my keys, smiled politely, and said, "Have a lovely evening." As I walked out, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. The Tesla's doors opened upward, dramatic and futuristic, and I slid inside. The engine purred to life and I drove away, leaving behind the family that once called me too poor. And for the first time I felt free. The drive home was the longest and yet the most peaceful of my life. The roads shimmered under the city lights, and for the first time in years, I felt completely in control, not of the car, not of the night, but of myself. I had walked into that mansion once as an outsider. I had been told I was too poor to sit at their table. Tonight I sat there on my own terms, unshaken, unbent, untouchable. But the real victory wasn't in the Tesla. Or in their stunned silence. The real victory was inside me. Later that night, Daniel confronted me. "You embarrassed me," he snapped, pacing in our living room. "Why would you do that? You think money makes you better now?" I looked at him steady. "No, Daniel. Respect makes me better. Self-worth makes me better. And both of those are things you and your family never gave me." He froze. For the first time he had no comeback. Something shifted in his eyes that night, maybe fear, maybe regret. But it was too late. I wasn't the same woman who once cried in the bathroom while he slept peacefully in the bed we shared. Days later his mother called me. Her tone was suddenly sweet, her words dripping with politeness. "We'd love to have you over again soon," she said. "You must tell us more about your business." I almost laughed. These were the same people who wouldn't let me sit at their table. Now they wanted to know how I built mine. But I declined politely. "I'm busy," I said. And I was busy building a life where their approval no longer mattered. The weeks that followed were filled with clarity. I no longer felt the need to prove myself. Not to Daniel. Not to his parents. Not to anyone. I realized something powerful. Revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you lost while trying to please them. That's what I had done. I didn't need to sit at their table anymore. I was building my own, one where I chose who sat beside me. It wasn't long before Daniel and I drifted completely. The cracks that had been forming for years finally broke open. He resented my independence. He hated that I no longer begged for his attention, that I no longer needed his family's crumbs of approval. One evening I told him calmly, "This isn't working anymore." His face went pale. He realized what I meant before I even said the word. Divorce. It wasn't anger that drove me. It was peace. I had outgrown the version of myself who clung to him for validation. And walking away was the final act of empowerment. Today I sit at a table of my own making. It's not carved from oak or decorated with crystal glasses, but it's stronger, richer, and more meaningful than anything his family ever had. It's a table built on respect, the respect of colleagues, clients, and most importantly myself. It's a table surrounded by people who see me, value me, and don't measure my worth by money alone. And yes, sometimes I still pull up in my Tesla not to show off, but to remind myself of the woman who once cried in silence and the woman she became. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. True revenge isn't loud. It's not screaming or slamming doors or proving them wrong in the heat of anger. True revenge is quiet. It's walking into a room with your head held high, knowing you built yourself from the ashes of their doubt. True revenge is reclaiming your dignity, your voice, your worth, and never giving it away again. I was once told I was too poor to sit at their table. Now I don't need their table at all. Because the sweetest justice isn't being invited in. It's building a life so full, so powerful, that they can't help but wish they were invited to yours. So to every woman who has ever been underestimated, belittled, or dismissed, remember this. You are not defined by the table they keep you away from. You are defined by the one you choose to build for yourself. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever been treated as less than by family or in-laws? How did you handle it?
Like this video if you believe in justice. Subscribe for more stories of empowerment and sweet revenge.